and welcome to my presentation on playing with King Alfred. Before we start, I would like to say a big thank you to the organizers of Value Foundation for making it possible for us to virtually meet and discuss our work on interactive posts. Thank you so much. The work that I would like to present to you today is part of a bigger project, which I call #KingAlfred, and is all about the representation of King Alfred in 21st century multimedia. And I think it's nice to say that this project actually started here at this conference, at the last edition, when I showed my homebrew app that helped me to learn a bit of Old English. And for today, first I would really like to give you a brief overview of the established facts of the life of the historical King Alfred before I show you different aspects of my #KingAlfred project. And then I would like to dive into 2 case studies with you and that hopefully show how I as an autistic gamer engage with games in a slightly different way. And the first one is Crusader Kings 2. The second one is Total War Thrones of Britannia. These present-day retellings of stories featuring King Alfred are mostly through TV series, computer games, reenactment and fan art. Frankly, this is nothing new, and there's a lot of scholarship, for example, on the Victorian retellings of the life and deeds of King Alfred the Great. But my focus is on the 21st century. And one of the many things that I really like about my research is to unravel the intersections between evidence, history, historical fantasy and historical fiction. And I do this in a rather traditional way by examining the characters, the conflict, dialogue, plot, setting, world building and theme. This technique is most directly applicable to the fan fiction that was written on the basis of the portrayal of Alfred the Great in various popular TV series. Through their rewritings, these fans explored themes connected to gender and sexuality, politics and the supernatural. And more hidden, these themes can also be present in other ways of playing Alfred, such as cosplay and reenactment. I interviewed various reenactors who perform as King Alfred, and they told me that they engage in this hobby because of a general interest in history, because of the spirit of brotherhood and as a form of nostalgia. And now I wonder whether those issues are also at stake when playing games. So let's dive into our case studies. Today I will briefly discuss these 4 games featuring King Alfred, and I would like to start with Crusader Kings 2 from 2012. As the name implies, Crusader Kings 2 is set during the era of the Crusades and features the leaders and realms that were extant in that time. And one of the biggest draws of Paradox Interactive's games is that players have almost unlimited options for customizing their playthrough. While there are scenarios, the ultimate objective is largely up to the player, so you can choose to be the Dauphin of France or just a minor lord with aspirations of conquering the realm. And similarly, you can change history entirely, for example by having Burgundy and not France becoming the predominant power in former Roman Gaul. With Crusader Kings 2, you can reenact history or you can change it entirely. The choice is up to the player. And because of this, there are 2 primary ways the game handles historical figures. If the player is that person, an avatar, and if the player interacts with this person as a so-called NPC, a non-playable character. And as you can imagine, that limits the player's options. For example, in Mount and Blade, I am playing as Princess Gisela, and I would really like to marry King Alfred, but the game didn't allow for it, for Alfred was already married and there was no alternative possible, so he could not get a divorce and he didn't want a second wife or something like that. Pity. But should the player choose Alfred the Great as their starting leader, then there is no need to adhere to the historical Alfred. The player can make up their own version of Alfred entirely, in terms of policies, actions, dispositions, etc., etc. And this is because Crusader Kings 2 allows for a huge amount of detailed customization when it comes to everything from warfare to espionage and domestic policy. In this sense, Alfred the Great's historical figure really becomes an avatar for the gamer. And these two very depictions illustrate a core difference between this game and the Total War games. For the latter have always leaned heavily on recreating historical battles and scenarios in a much more linear fashion than the Crusader Kings titles. Total War Saga Thrones of Britannia specifically focuses on the Viking invasions of the British Isles and gives the player the choice of leading one of the factions, Alfred the Great being the leader of the Anglo-Saxons. The game offers the potential for alternative histories within the narrow context of the Viking invasion of Britain. And because of this, the game is much more focused on the era and the persons that occupy it in particular. Still, Alfred the Great is only one leader among many and is not depicted as the inevitable victor, nor is he cast as a heroic figure. Yet, the linear quality of the Total War games means that one of the 10 factions must win at the end of the day, and one of these 10 leaders will be the leader. That we already knew that Alfred the Great succeeded in history helps us in our evaluation of him of the playable character, but it is still complicated by the need for the player to relate to and act as Alfred the Great. The trailer for the game shows this quite vividly and helped draw the central difference between the two in great relief. In Total War Saga Thrones of Britannia, you role-play as Alfred the Great, and this confines your actions and choices to a greater degree than it does using the historical figure as your avatar while gaming. The central difference in the gaming experience between Crusader Kings 2 and Total War Saga Thrones of Britannia revolve mainly around the degree to which the player has the ability to make choices that impact the historical narrative. Because in Crusader Kings 2, Alfred the Great is more like one avatar among many. That game, while historically accurate in spirit, is not beholden to history as written, because that's not the premise of the game. Indeed, much of its appeal is in taking some unknown leader and making that person as great as Alfred the Great is in our timeline. This basically implies that the leaders are interchangeable, and aside from greater endowments in land territory and wealth, they are. Crusader Kings 2 does not preference one leader over another, nor does it force a specific timeline narrative. Total War Saga Thrones of Britannia, on the other hand, is much more constrained geographically as well as narratively. In this game, the player is an actor, and Alfred the Great is their role. Because the scope is narrow to the British Isles, and because the player can only do so much when it comes to deviating from history, Total War Saga Thrones of Britannia is the cosplayer to Crusader Kings 2 fanfiction writer. But of course that doesn't stop Total War fans from rewriting the stories, as is illustrated by this Lost Kingdom mod. Through a not so nuanced depiction, this game emphasized the martial struggles in founding the English nation above cultural and legal facets, as befits a game drawn from the popular television show. A more interesting case is the fan-made Anglo-Saxon mod for Civilization V. Here, the freedom of the Civilization games, plus their deep and intimate ties with the histories of peoples and a grand-scale imagining of things, come together to result in something that, while informed by history, cannot properly tell us anything about it. How so? The Alfred the Great mod for Civilization V basically imposes upon the game the idea that Anglo-Saxons are somehow separate and apart from English, and also from Celtic peoples of the British Isles. Again, this is acceptable within the terms of a game where the British Isles do not exist, but it becomes very problematic when we look at it from a historical point of view. Not only is it impossible to separate what we know of an English history now The same history that informs Civilization 5's developers from the Anglo-Saxons, but also this kind of understanding of this period of British history could lead to fundamentally flawed perceptions. What this mod does make easy is the analysis in terms of how the depiction of Alfred the Great fits in with our understanding of him historically, as well as the needs of this specific medium. As in our history, Alfred the Great is known in the game for his able administration and martial powers. While some might argue that it would be difficult to overemphasize Alfred's positive traits as a ruler, the Civilization 5 mod very much sticks to the tried and true wise warlord trope. In many ways, the Anglo-Saxon mods for these games are glimpses into the current zeitgeist. Civilization and its usage of historical figures can't help but fall into the camp of the great man theory of history, whereas the Total War games find themselves restricted by actual history and the need to fit that in within consumer demands. This can be evidenced by the mods tying in the popular TV show The Lost Kingdom and the like. Because of this, Alfred the Great becomes more and more a reflection of our current time than anything else, and it is for analyzing how we grapple with history and how we quantify it in an electronic space that emerges as a truly interesting discussion as a result. Another aspect that fascinates me of the mods featuring King Alfred the Great is the fans' choice of music, such as this charming melody that appears in one original game and 2 mods for vastly different games. As in all 3 games the same romantic cinematic score was used, I rearranged this piece in a style that I expect to be more close to that of the Anglo-Saxons themselves. It was rescored for the musical instruments these people knew and in the harmonic language of the medieval gimmel technique that was so specific for the British Isles. I would now like to play the first demo of this song, with many thanks to my producer Booty. And with the end of this music, we have reached the end of my presentation for today. I really hope that you enjoyed it, and I'm much looking forward to discussing it with you. On the last slide, I put some considerations of the issues that I keep encountering during this research, and I would be very happy if you would share some of your thoughts about them. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope to meet in person soon. Bye bye!